Hey, what's up guys? In this week's video, I want to show you how you can create shatterable text for using Element 3D. So I've seen similar things done with Cinema 4D and other software, but with Maya, since their shatter function is lackluster at best, I had to come up with a completely different method to get pieces to be shattered. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using Photoshop to create a background that we can vectorize in Illustrator. And then in Illustrator, we can take the text or whatever image that you'd want to shatter. We'll be doing a Boolean operation inside of Illustrator, exporting an SVG into Maya, and then cleaning up the geometry, extruding it, and then separating all the pieces. We'll export that as an OBJ, and then in After Effects, we'll use Element 3D to be able to animate the shattered piece. So we're going to be creating something that looks like this. If that sounds interesting, let's get started. All right, so the first step is to create a new canvas in Photoshop. When you're creating your canvas, just make sure it's large enough to be whatever the size of the image or text that you're trying to create. So in this case, I'll just lower that so it's not quite so tall. That's just a thin strip. This will be fine. Next, we'll go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. Now I'm going to crank the noise all the way up, and then I'm going to turn off monochromatic so there's some color in there, and then click OK. Then we're going up to Filter, Pixelate, Crystallize. If you zoom out here so you can see the whole canvas, this is going to be how many pieces that you could potentially have inside of Element 3D. So the more pieces you have, the slower this is going to be, but the more detailed your shattering will be essentially. That's going to be pretty good. We'll say, okay, there's quite a few pieces here. All right, so the next thing is we're going to do Control M, or you can do whatever color correction tools you like. But essentially, I'm going to get rid of everything that's black. So I'm just going to lift my black values up. When I do that, you'll notice that nothing is black anymore, and then click OK. This is going to be important a little bit later. All right, so now I can just save this. All right, so let's head on over to Illustrator. So in Illustrator, we're going to open up that document. And the things that you're going to need here under Window, we need Image Trace, and you're going to need Pathfinder. So if those aren't already loaded for you, you need to go into your windows to find these. All right, so I am not an expert at Illustrator. In fact, I only ever use Illustrator to vectorize things. So here are the steps that I have chosen to do this. If you are a pro at Illustrator, perhaps there is a better way to do this, but otherwise just do these steps. I'm going to select this background, then we're going to go up to Image Trace, make sure that the mode is set to color, then click Trace. After that's finished, then we need to click Expand, and you can see all the different pieces. All right, so the next part is, this is where you would bring in your text or bring in your image or whatever it is, and then you would need to vectorize that as well. But in this case, since I'm just creating some text, I can do that inside of Illustrator. So I grab the text tool, going to go to my text options here and just make this a lot larger so I can see it, and I'll add some text. So when you're doing this, you want to maximize the amount of pieces that you have, the amount of shards that you have inside of your text or image or whatever. So in this case, I'm trying to utilize the most space that I can. After you've done that, you're going to select your text, right click, and do Create Outlines. So again, if you have imported another image, you'll have to do the image trace and vectorize it. So that's going to be slightly different, but if you're just making text, you can simply create outlines from the text within Illustrator. Next, what we're going to do is go into the Direct Selection tool, and you're going to select the entire canvas. So all the pieces and the text are selected. Then under Pathfinder, you're going to do the Divide operation. Next, you're going to select one of the pieces of your text and then go up to Select, and then same fill color, and then go back up to Select and then say Inverse and delete them. So what we're left with here are all the different pieces, and these will be like different objects when they shatter in Element 3D, and then all of the rest of the background is now gone. Right, so now we can export this. So we'll go to File, Export, Export As. We are going to save this as an SVG. Click OK. And now it's time to head over to Maya. All right, so when starting in Maya, you want to click on this SVG button, or you want to go up to Create SVG. I'm going to go to Import and import the SVG. So right away when you import it, you can kind of see the problem. This same type of thing would occur inside Element 3D if you were to simply copy the vectors directly from Illustrator and paste them in as masks or shapes, and then try to extrude them inside Element 3D. So you're going to get kind of like messed up geometry. Same thing happens in Maya. You want to go to Geometry, disable the extrusion, and you'll also notice that these are not level, and at the back there's different pieces that seem to be offset. So all we need to do is go to a top view, so click space, space again, click F to center this in view, right click over the object, go to face mode, and select the faces. Click R for scale, then hold down the J key to activate increment step, and then just scale it upwards into itself. This is going to make sure all of the geometry is in a perfect line. Click space again to go back to your perspective view. You're going to click Ctrl E to do an extrusion. And when you click Ctrl E, you want to click the move tool or the W key, and then you want to pull it out manually. Don't try to do the extrusion inside that tool. Otherwise, since the normals are facing different directions, when you pull it out, they'll each kind of go off at different angles. Pull this forwards. Now, whatever depth you choose here, you can edit this later inside Element 3D simply by scaling the Z axis. All right, so the next thing we want to do is make a selection of all the outside faces so we can make the outside be a different material if we want to in Element 3D. So if you want all your pieces, both inside and outside, to have the same color or the same material, then you can omit this step. Otherwise, you want to go over to your select tool, double click it, make sure camera-based selection is on, and then hold down the Shift and Control keys, and then just select all of these outside faces. Just orbit around, make sure you've got everything. Go back here. This is probably the easiest, fastest way to do this, although it does require that you just make sure you've grabbed everything. All right, so next we want to right click over one of these pieces, go to Assign Favorite Material, and you can just select Blend. All right, so we want to rename this blend, but we have to do it through the shading group. So click up here, and we're just going to type in outer. Now, the reason you have to do the shading group is this is what the OBJ is going to store, and this is what Element 3D is going to read. If you just change this material name, it's not really going to show up in Element 3D. If you didn't do that at all, it doesn't really matter. It just makes it easier to figure out which material is what. Go open up our Hypershade, and this SVG blend, this was created when we created the SVG import. You want to select this, click the output connection, and then you can rename this one to be inner. If you right click over that material and select all objects with material, and then select the isolate selection button, you can then see all the faces that are inside. So these could potentially be a different material if you wanted them to be inside of Element 3D. Okay, so I'm going to de-isolate that selection. The next thing we're going to do is triangulate these faces, because as you can see, these are all n-gons or mostly n-gons, and that's not going to read particularly well in Element 3D. You might get missing faces or a few spikes here and there. So what we're going to do, go up to Mesh and then select Triangulate. The topology looks absolutely horrendous, but at least it will be viewed properly inside Element 3D. And since we're not really going to edit this, it doesn't matter if it's triangles or quads. So after we've triangulated, we want to separate the mesh, because all of these are one object right now, but inside this object, there are actually little sub-objects from when we extruded it. So you want to go up to Mesh and then Separate. Now, when you separate, depending on how many pieces you have, it could take just a few seconds or it could take a few minutes. It just depends on how many pieces you have and the speed of your PC. So just give it a few minutes and let it finish extracting all the pieces. So the next thing would be to delete the history. Before you would delete the history, what you would normally do is merge all the vertices. Now, depending on the complexity of your geometry, and again, the speed of your PC, merging can take quite a bit of time, and it's not really going to give you that much advantage except for a lower file size. So inside Element 3D, you probably aren't going to notice if it's merged or not, and I think the time spent merging is probably not worth it. However, if you wanted to, you would just select everything and go up to Edit Mesh and then Merge. But if you do this, I would recommend saving, because this could take a long time, and if you just can't be bothered to wait for it to finish, you can at least reload the scene. All right, so if you don't do that, what I would consider doing next is going to delete history. Again, deleting the history can take a few seconds up to a minute. All right, so when that is done, we are now ready to export the geometry. I would recommend freezing the transforms. It just makes sure everything's kind of reset to 0, and then go ahead and center the pivot. This just helps if you come back to Maya and you want to like move different pieces around, everything would be centered to itself and not the overall geometry. After that is done, click on File, Export Selection, and then you need to make sure it's an OBJ export. The only files that Element 3D can import are going to be the C4D files, E3D files like Element 3D objects, and then OBJ. There's no FBX support. And then just click Export Selection. And next we can go over to After Effects. So I'm just going to make a standard composition, and inside I'm going to grab a new solid, This is going to be for our text. And then grab an element effect, and then enter the scene setup. So inside the scene setup, we're going to click import and then go find your OBJ and then click OK. And inside here, if it's too small, just scale it up. And if we look inside the object, you'll notice that there's a hierarchy, and this shows the two different shader groups that we created in Maya. So we have the outer faces and the inner faces. So later on, we can go ahead and add a separate material to both of those groups. All right, so I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to make a new camera now. So I'm just going to grab a new camera with the default settings. That's fine. And then click the C key. And we can just rotate the camera and we can find a better view. So next I'm going to be using some of the techniques that I showed in the quick and easy backgrounds video with After Effects. If you haven't checked that out, it might provide some useful ideas on how to set up a background pretty quickly. Gonna add some color correction to this. And next I'm going to import some stock footage. Now the stock footage I'm using is going to add quite a bit of depth to the scene. And these are fog elements that I got from a free pack on premiumbeats.com. And as of this video, they were free, so I'll put a link in the description. They're 4K, they're excellent quality, and they really do help add quite a bit of depth to your scenes. So I'm using 3 of them in here, but I think the pack comes with about 20. So it's very useful. Check it out. As I said, it's free. Again, more color correction just to kind of blend the elements, add in a bit more blue, tone down some of the lights a little bit. Now the speed is pretty good. I don't need to retime anything. And then I'm going to add a vignette. And as I go through this, I need to add some curves to these just to integrate each of the elements into the scene and make them feel like they're actually part of it. All right, so now I'm going to go back into Element 3D. And I'm going to turn on the environment so we can see it. And I'm going to find an HDR that has cooler tones so it matches the scene that I've started to make. Next, I'm going to add a material to the outer and inner faces. And I have the Pro Shaders pack from Video Copilot. So if you didn't have those, you would probably need to make your own textures or just maybe find one of the presets for now. And then for the inner material, I want to use the Bright Light, which is a standard material that comes with Element 3D. I'm just going to change the illumination color so it fits better with the scene that I have. All right, so let's click OK. And you can see that the lighting is pretty flat. So what I'm going to do is add a parallel light just to add a bit more depth to the scene. Try to get a highlight on the letters. I'm going to pop over to a top view so I can reorient the light a little bit more easily. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna go into the render settings, turn on Screen Space AO. And the reason I'm not going to use ray traced in this case is because some of the pieces, they're not perfectly flat, or there might be like slight gaps in them because we didn't really spend that much time in Maya making sure everything was fixed perfectly. So if it was ray traced, probably going to get like black edges around some of the cuts. So Screen Space AO is a little bit safer in that regard. I'm also going to add a supplement light in the additional lighting tab. I'm also going to switch out the material for the outer faces. I want something a little bit cleaner, less grungy. And now we should be ready to move forward. Alright, so this is looking a little bit more put together now. I want to go into my group 1, go into the particle replicator. I'm going to keyframe the positions and the rotations. Click U to see my keyframes. And then at the very beginning, I'm going to have it further back and let it fly in. I'm going to ease in this animation with the F9 key. Alright, so finally the part we've been waiting for. Let's go into our group look. We're going to go into multi-object. So multi-object allows an object such as all of this text, which is technically just one object, like a grouped object. It allows you to use all the sub-objects inside. So for example, we have displacement here. We can increase displacement. We could increase scatter, increase noise. All sorts of things you can do with this. But what I want to do, I'm going to grab the noise amount, and then for the noise evolution, I'll just add in a little expression here. So click Alt, hit the stopwatch, time, multiply it by 100 or something, just so it's always moving. grab the size random and also the random rotation. I'll click U to see my keyframes again, go to the beginning. For noise, I'll increase the noise. Random rotation, I'll do 2 full rotations. And then for the size random, I'll have that at 100%. Get all the pieces to kind of fly in like that, quite like that. I want all the inner pieces though to glow. So I'm going to go down into the render settings, glow, enable glow. Intensity is too high, so I'll lower that. And I'll increase the radius. All right, so now what we can do is use the animation engine. So the animation engine allows you to animate between 2 different groups. So for example, we have group 1, which is our text, and then group 2, which is empty. So if we animate between that, they kind of go away. It kind of animates into nothing. Go into the size rotation and these random properties I added. Ease those in. You can see it a little bit better. Pull these forward so they end a little bit sooner. So as we increase the animation, you can see it's kind of being like pulled in from the sides. A little bit too smooth, so we can lower the smoothness here and increase the randomness a bit. And then you can see you can have all the pieces kind of pulled from the side. Or since this is directional, you can go have it from the top. So go into your direction options, go down to the vertical direction. And if you increase that by 90 degrees, you can have it come from the top or the bottom. You can do the inverse of that too. So what I'd like to do is actually leave this on radial. Radial is pretty nice. Gives me a cool like from the edges look. If I want this to be from the edges, I'll change that to inwards. And actually, I want this to go from group 2, where it's nothing, to group 1. And then I'll go back up to the first frame here, keyframe the animation at 0, and at frame 60, put that at 100%. Actually reduce the smoothness a bit here. Probably reduce the randomness as well. And I think I'll go back to the outwards approach and have it come out like that. All right, so we start off with nothing, and then we get the little particles come in, and then they form the word. So many things you can do with this, but I think that looks pretty good. All right, so now I want to add some depth of field. Go into my camera, I'll enable depth of field, make sure lock to zoom is off, open up another view, open up our camera options again, and what we're looking for is the focal distance. Pull this up. And this would be the C, so I want the C to be in focus. An f-stop of 2.8 is pretty good. If you wanted this to be a little bit more blurry, you could lower that to some unrealistic value. All right, so this looks pretty good. Now there is one thing I wanted to point out, and that's you can still see these lines sticking through. So this is a problem that results from not having merged your geometry inside of Maya or having like little gaps in your geometry. So this is best solved by going back to Maya and fixing all those gaps on the vertical edges. There is a way to fix this pretty easily, at least for this scene. It's always better to kind of fix the root itself instead of just cover up the issue. But if you were really short on time, this is a very, very quick solution. So I'm going to duplicate my element layer, call this glow fix, go inside my scene setup, and then I'll copy the outer material and paste it on the inner material. And right away you'll see that that problem goes. And then we'll need a matte layer, so we'll add a new solid, pull this up. And we're just going to look for where the letters begin to form. So as soon as the letter forms, we'll grab a pen tool, make a simple mask around T, and then we'll animate the mask path. So by frame 60, this should be completely encompassing all the text. Gonna move that back here. That looks pretty good. I'll trim the layer with Alt or left bracket. I'll feather this out a bit just in case we've missed something and it's a little bit too sharp somewhere. We'll set the track matte to be alpha, and we'll solve that issue pretty quickly. Right, so they're not shining through blue anymore. One other thing I can do here, we look at the aliasing that's going on the tops of these letters. You can fix that pretty easily by going into output. And we're going to do enhanced multi-sampling, and then we're also going to go into sampling and aliasing and increase the smoothing. Something about 4, fix some of those edges. You can also do sub-pixel post effects as well. That looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. All right, so I'm going to add a quick color correction to this. I just want to add a little bit more contrast. Just darken the shadows a little bit. It's a little bit better there. Then I'm going to add motion blur. So just make sure motion blur is enabled for the composition and then enable it for the layer as well. With all these particles moving pretty quickly, we're getting not so nice motion blur. You can really see how choppy it looks. I'm going to go into render settings, select motion blur, and then for motion blur, we could double it. See if 12 samples will fix it. that looks pretty good. Now at the very end here, I just want to add like a tint of blue. I'm going to grab another color correct, go into blue, add just a little hint. That looks a little bit better integrated now. Alright, so I'm going to render out the final result and I'll show you, and I'll have a couple other ideas as well of what you could do to make this look pretty cool. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit long-winded, but there's a lot of things you can do with it. Maybe not even for this application, but maybe for something else as well. Alright, so hope you guys learned something. If you did, drop a like. If you have a question, leave a comment, and I'll be back next week with another video. Peace.